From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of my colleagues, and in particular Dr. Mary Jane Deeb, Chief of the African and Middle Eastern Division, unfortunately she can't be with us today, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to everyone. I'm Joan Weeks, head of the Near East section and the sponsor of today's program. And we're very pleased to present this program on business entrepreneurship in Saudi Arabia, opportunities for partnering and investing in emerging business. But before we start today's program, I'd like to give you a brief overview of our division and its resources in the hopes that you'll return and use our collections for your research. So this is a custodial division, and what that means is that we actually have the books under our purview, and we have 3 sections that build and serve the collections to researchers from the world. We cover over 78 countries and over 24 languages. The African section includes the countries of Sub-Saharan Africa. The Hebraic section is responsible for Judaica and Hebraica worldwide. And the Near East section covers all of the Arab countries, including North Africa, Turkey, Turkic Central Asia, Iran, Afghanistan, and the Muslims of Western China, Russia, the Balkans, and the people of the Caucasus, a very extensive region. After the program, we invite you to fill in the little evaluation forms that you see in your seats, because this gives us an opportunity to see what programs work well, what you like, and what you'd like to see in the future. We also invite you to pick up our little form about our Four Corners blog with very interesting posts by our curators, as well as like us on Facebook, and that way you'll hear about future programs. And in addition, to remind you, this program's being videotaped, so if you like to ask questions at the end, which we invite you to do, but you're implicitly giving your permission to be recorded. So now, without further ado, I'd like to ask my colleague, Nawal Kawar, our Arab World Specialist, to come up and introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Joan. It is really my great pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Edward Burton and thank him and appreciate his time, taking time from his work to come and be with us today. Mr. Burton is the present president and chief executive officer of the U.S. Saudi Arabian Business Council. He works with the American and Saudi public and private sectors to promote the interests of the U.S.-Saudi Arabian bilateral commercial relationship. The main aim of the U.S.-Saudi Arabian Business Council is to improve the mutual knowledge and understanding between the private sectors of both the United States and Saudi Arabia. The Council's function is to promote trade and investment between the two countries by utilizing and targeting specialized bilateral trade and investment opportunities in the U.S. and the Saudi Kingdom. The U.S. Saudi Arabian Business Council, which was established in 1993, has been sponsoring events and activities such as trade missions, conferences, seminars, forums, and high-level networking between business partners. I hope we will be invited to one of them. For example, the 3 U.S.-Saudi Business Opportunities Forums held in Chicago, Atlanta, and Los Angeles in 2010, 2011, and 2013, respectively, were the largest gatherings of Saudi and American businesses in the history of the Council's work, which attests to the strong ties between the two business communities, that is, U.S. and Saudi Arabia. Mr. Burton holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science from the University of Charleston and a Doctor of Jurisprudence degree from Dickinson School of Law. He practiced law in New Jersey with the law firm Cooper Levenson. He also received certified international trade and management training at the Thunderbird School of International Business and the Harvard Business School of Publishing. Mr. Burton was director of the U.S. Export Assistance Center in Philadelphia. Prior to joining the U.S. Department of Commerce, he served former New Jersey Governor Christine Todd Whitman as the director of the State of New Jersey's International Trade Office. Mr. Burton also served as the commercial attaché at the American Embassy in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. He managed a staff of 27 officers, commercial specialists, and other local direct hire personnel serving offices in the cities of Riyadh, Jeddah, and Tehran. He was responsible for all U.S. Foreign Commercial Services, USFCS, operations in Saudi Arabia and had oversight over all USFCS management and fiscal matters in the U.S. Embassy and consulates in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. He also supervised USFCS operation in Manama, Bahrain, through a partnership arrangement with the U.S. Embassy in Manama. Mr. Burton was also appointed by former U.S. Commerce Secretary Donald Evans to serve as the USFCS Regional Coordinator for the agency's Iraq Reconstruction Regional Initiative. Mr. Burton has counseled hundreds of Fortune 500 companies, as well as small and middle capitalized firms from a variety of industries such as oil and gas, downstream petrochemical, construction, medical, defense and security, information technology, and technical services. He is the author of the book, Business and Entrepreneurship in Saudi Arabia, published by the Best Company, John Wiley and Sons in August 2016. The book is available for purchase and book signing after the event. Please help me welcome Mr. Ed Burton.
Thank you very much, Nawal, for those introductory remarks. I think they're almost the same length as my remarks, but I thank you for that introduction. It's a pleasure for me professionally to be here in the Library of Congress. I thank you, Nawal. I thank you, Joan, and the Near East Division for sponsoring today's event. And to be able to share your lunch hour with you to focus on my book, Business and Entrepreneurship in Saudi Arabia. I have some prepared remarks, but I probably will lace them with a couple of comments and observations from my time with the embassy in Riyadh and my time with the U.S. Saudi Arabian Business Council. Before I begin to speak about the substance of my book, allow me to address what I'm sure is probably the most asked question of authors, particularly after their first book, and this is my first literary project. Why did you write your book? So the answer to that question has much to do with where my professional career has taken me over the last 16 years, as well as the body of literature having to do with the business community in Saudi Arabia. So first, in terms of my professional life, I landed in Riyadh in the middle of the summer in 2003 for the beginnings of my diplomatic posting as commercial attaché at the American Embassy in Saudi Arabia. From the moment I landed, the stellar professionals at the U.S. Commercial Service under the U.S. Department of Commerce took me under their wings and made it their business for the following 3 years to introduce me to just about every business person of significance in Saudi Arabia and made it their business so that those businesses knew me, those business leaders knew me, and the importance of the work that the U.S. Commercial Service does in championing the interests of American companies in Saudi Arabia. Having joined the U.S. Saudi Arabian Business Council 10 years ago, I continue the journey with these Saudi businesses, and my respect and admiration for this important part of the global corporate community has only grown in measure. So to provide the first answer to that question, why I wrote the book, in large measure it was to repay the value to my own professional career this sustained contact with the business community has brought me. Secondly, although there has been much written on Saudi Arabia over the last couple of decades, there have been few books dedicated to the subject of businesses in Saudi Arabia. As I mentioned in my book, a cursory review of books about Saudi Arabia have primarily centered on oil, geopolitics, the Saudi economy, or social issues such as the role and importance of the lives of women in Saudi Arabia. There have been very few books aimed at accurately depicting the vibrant and dynamic nature of the Saudi business community and what they do for the country. So I wanted to write a book directed predominantly to a Western audience that portrayed the Saudi business sector as vigorously engaged in global markets, industrially diverse, and a corporate community that is unified in their support for the national values and goals of the Saudi people. The most mentioned Saudi company in the world press these days, and actually in any press or at any time for that matter, is Saudi Aramco, the largest oil company in the world. Saudi Aramco's size, operations, and oil production far outpaces the world's next 4 oil companies combined. The company has been in the press a lot lately due to the anticipated initial public offering that is expected in next year in 2018. The company is, of course, one of the most prolific in terms of not only upstream production of oil, but as well as downstream production. And many people don't know, but much of the oil that flows through the pumps and gasoline stations, a growing amount, is from Saudi Aramco's joint venture operations in Port Arthur, the refinery down in Texas. So when Saudi Aramco takes an expected 5% of that company public, it is anticipated to be the largest IPO in history. Now, just to give you some perspective, the largest IPO to date is Alibaba's September 2014 IPO that netted the company proceeds of $25 billion. The next largest in history before that was when the credit card company Visa went public in 2008, netting it $17.9 billion. So the process of evaluating Saudi Aramco's assets is ongoing. However, at this time, some analysts project the value of those assets of Saudi Aramco to be between $1 and $2 trillion. So it is expected that the proceeds from Saudi Aramco's IPO will reach at least $100 billion when the IPO occurs. But to my book, business is much more than Saudi Aramco and Saudi Basic Industries Corporation, SABIC, which is also one of the largest petrochemical companies in the world. Although those companies consistently post some of the largest capital spending in Saudi Arabia, there are other segments of the Saudi corporate society that are of equally important economic value to the country and essential to the current government's plans to restructure and diversify its economy. So I wanted to write a book about Saudi Arabia's family-owned businesses and the budding young entrepreneurship that is occurring in Saudi Arabia. I wanted to highlight a few of the well-known corporate figures who are owners of the large family-owned businesses, as well as to draw attention to some of the rising Saudi entrepreneurs within the kingdom. I did not want to write a book to contain dry facts and figures of how these businesses contribute to the health and stability of the nation solely. Rather, I wanted to bring to life the personalities and opinions of these business owners, again, to primarily a Western audience who, quite frankly, many find Saudi Arabia quite enigmatic. And even businesses that are doing business there find it sometimes enigmatic. There is a continuum in the life of Saudi Arabia's business community, from business owners that started their family businesses in the 1940s, 50s, and early 1960s, to today's Saudis' youth that have innovative startups and companies with disruptive technologies that are having a global impact, to some of the older business leaders, sometimes referred to as the old guard. Many of these older people, and as well as the young people, are really recrafting how business is being done in Saudi Arabia. So I wanted to portray that. Many of these older business owners and some of these Saudi-owned businesses, the larger Saudi-owned businesses, are multinational conglomerates with business interests in many countries, including the United States. So many of the first-generation family-owned business owners, like Sheikh Abdulaziz Al Quraishi, the former central bank governor of the country, and actually one of our business council's former Saudi co-chairman, are venerated and respected within Saudi Arabia. Yet among this continuum, there are the rising second and third-generation family-owned business members that are starting to assume leadership authority in many of these companies and are making their own marks within the Saudi business community. So I think, in part, the special character of my book is attributed to the degree to which these family-owned businesses really opened their doors to me during the research phase and writing of my book, particularly Sheikh Abdulaziz Al Quraishi and his brothers and their company, which was formed in 1958. They gave me an exclusive look inside their companies. I featured 3 companies in my book, and all 3 permitted me interviews with not only the older generation, the founders of these companies, but also their sons and in some cases daughters that are taking over their business. As I have presented the opinions of these younger generational family-owned business leaders, I believe that they do add significant value to my book and make it worth reading. So since I've already started to talk about the contents of my book by telling you why I wrote it, let me take some time and tell you more about the substantive messages in the book. I would like to use the remaining time just to take you through some of the select chapters and highlight some of the subjects and important themes I believe that make the book worth reading. In the book's introduction, I opened with a very small vignette featuring Sheikh Abdulaziz Sheikh Abdul Rahman Al Quraishi. Sheikh Abdul Rahman is one of the most respected business leaders in Saudi Arabia. And I open up my book with this vignette and his trek as a 7-year-old boy in 1940, traveling from his ancestral home of Rabigh, Saudi Arabia, to Riyadh by camel. Rabigh is about 75 miles from the center of Riyadh. Sheikh Abdul Rahman Al Juraisi is just a stellar individual and is chairman of the Juraisi Group, which is one of the largest companies in Saudi Arabia. It is a Saudi conglomerate with business interests all over the world. He is also the former chairman of the Council of Saudi Chambers of Commerce and Industry, which is the umbrella chamber for the country, as well as the chairman of the Riyadh chamber for many years. So a couple of years ago, I was at Sheikh Abdul Rahman's home for dinner one evening, along with other American and Saudi business people. During the dinner, Sheikh Abdul Rahman retold the story of his early days as a youth in Riyadh in the 1940s. He told his dinner guests of a time when Riyadh was essentially a small village that went to sleep at sundown. I used Sheikh Abdul Rahman's story of traveling to Riyadh as a boy because it serves as a common example of how many of today's headlined private and public sector leaders began their journey from their modest homes and made their ways to cities like Riyadh, Jeddah, the old cities of the Eastern Province, such as Dammam, to seek their careers, education, and fortunes. I also used the story he told that evening to contrast the city of Riyadh as it was before the creation of the modern Saudi state and how it has become a global city today. Along with Sheikh Abdul Rahman's story, I cite 2 years of the most important to the city of Riyadh: 1902 and 1932. In 1902, the founder of the modern Saudi state, King Abdulaziz bin Abdurrahman Al Saud, reclaimed the city of Riyadh and used its strategically centered location in the country to launch a 3 decades-long struggle to unify the tribes of the Arabian Peninsula. King Abdulaziz began his unification on horseback. However, in 1907, it is believed the first automobile eventually landed in the kingdom, one of the first in the Arabian Peninsula. The king was one of the first, of course, to receive these new machines. The automobile was deftly used by King Abdulaziz in his national unification efforts and later in executing the many diplomatic missions he undertook around the country. And you see some of these photographs. Just go back just a couple. You see King Abdulaziz arriving in Jeddah in 1931, and there is a next photograph is King Abdulaziz and Prince Faisal on an inspection of the oil wells in 1947. And the last photograph, of course, illustrates how the automobile allowed King Abdulaziz to discharge his diplomatic duties as head of state. And you see the king here with the leading Syrian politician of the day, Mardam Bey, in Taif in 1934. So the automobile and particularly American manufactured automobile parts were an integral part of the beginning of the modern Saudi state. The other important year in the life of Riyadh was 1932. I mentioned this in the book. The year the sovereign kingdom of Saudi Arabia was established. That year marked a turning point for the city, which began its slow growth in terms of population and national prominence. It is interesting to note that in 1932, at the declaration of sovereignty of the country, the nation was among one of the most poor on the face of the earth. And it was largely a desert where the kingdom's only major source of revenue came from pilgrims visiting Islam's holiest cities. So just to close on my thoughts with Sheikh Abdul Rahman's dinner table discussion, that ultimately led to my devoting my book's introduction to him. I would like to read a couple of short paragraphs, actually one paragraph, relating to the city of Riyadh as it was back then. The Riyadh of 1902 was no more than a mile across. It consisted of the Masmak, the citadel that was also the seat of government, a large mosque, a spacious marketplace, and several hundred houses, all built of mud brick. The entire city was surrounded by a thick mud wall ranging as high as 25 feet. The city's famous date gardens were mainly located outside the walls. Sheikh Abdurrahman recounts the story of his youth in Riyadh, that when the end came for Isha prayer, the nighttime and last of the daily prayers recited by practicing Muslims, the city would shut itself for the night by closing the main gates to those outside. The Riyadh of the time of young Abdurrahman's arrival is not the Riyadh of today. In 1940, there were no overhead electricity transmission lines, no power stations or state power regulator. No light bulbs were to be found in most Saudi homes, mosques, or commercial establishments. If one had looked in earnest, electricity could have been found in some of the palaces of the royal family. Electrical power generation and the mass distribution of electricity came to Saudi Arabia and Riyadh in 1951 with the establishment of the kingdom's first public utility, Riyadh Electricity Company. During Sheikh Abdurrahman's time in Riyadh, growing up in the 1940s, there were fewer than 30,000 city inhabitants, and the economy was primarily composed of merchant and agrarian commercial activity, and the business, of course, of local government. Today, the city has 5.7 million people. This is Riyadh, actually, in around the 1920s or 30s. And this is the view of the same location, Qasr al-Hukm, as it is today. So today, 5.7 million people in a population growth rate of 4%. Its economy is one of the most industrially diverse in the Middle East, and its gross domestic product is estimated to be more than $16 billion. And you saw some pictures of old Riyadh and new Riyadh, and the Big Dig, referencing the Big Dig in Boston of years ago, is happening in Riyadh with the construction of the metro. So hopefully, if any of you have been to Dubai and you've seen that beautiful metro that they have, Saudi Arabia is building their own version. So I'll make short mention of Chapter 1, which covers the period 1938 to 1970, a critical period in Saudi Arabia's history when the discovery of oil occurred. And here you see the momentous Dammam number 7, the first commercially viable oil well in Saudi Arabia. During this time, the creation of the kingdom's administrative governmental structures were formed, and the humble beginnings of some of Saudi Arabia's most iconic family-owned businesses got off the ground. In Chapter 1, I introduced one of the current themes of the book, and one that I believe is essential to the success of the kingdom's effort to grow the country's economy. Namely, it's the question of whether there is adequate coordination between government and the private sector at all levels in pursuing the country's development goals. One of the most important events occurring in the kingdom within the last 15 years that has had international significance for the country has been Saudi Arabia's accession to the World Trade Organization, WTO. Saudi Arabia's membership in the WTO was preceded by a very lively debate in the country about the impact of WTO membership to the nation's private sector. During the 1960s and 70s, there were many import substitution laws enacted in Saudi Arabia to protect its domestic market from foreign competition. As the country's lead WTO negotiators began to bargain away some of those protectionist laws, Saudi businesses began to be more vocal in the press, expressing their extreme unease over some of the new measures that were aimed at opening up the Saudi market to foreign competition. The government was obligated to take these measures in order to join WTO. There were dire warnings from some within Saudi Arabia's business community that industrial development projects would fail. Many Saudi companies would face financial ruin if the kingdom were to go through with their membership in WTO. In the years prior to WTO accession, Saudi Arabia enacted 42 laws, 19 of which were required for WTO admission. So in my book, I conclude that much of the high anxiety exhibited by many of the Saudi businesses was probably unwarranted. To be sure, some Saudi businesses were negatively impacted by the country's WTO accession. However, there is evidence to suggest that WTO membership actually boosted the kingdom's efforts to diversify its economy. The opening of the economic market opportunities to foreign investors has also undoubtedly led to more technology transfer, sharing of industrial processes, and the funding of proprietary innovation applications inside the kingdom. So net-net, it has been a positive. Chapter 2 of my book offers a broad view of the surprising amount of innovation taking place in the kingdom. It is important to note that Saudi Arabia's journey towards cultural advancement in technology and innovation has its roots in the illustrious past of Islamic research and discovery. I make mention of this in the very first paragraph of my book, and if you'll allow me, I want to read just a short paragraph from that. Invention and worldwide impact contributions to science are nothing new to the Islamic world. During the Abbasid dynasty, 750 to 1258, Islamic culture, arts, and scientific advancement reached its apex. The vertex of this pinnacle legacy of achievement was the undeniable fact that the world's economy at that time benefited enormously from the furtive and creative minds of Islamic theorists, scholars, and scientists resident in the dynasty's capital, Baghdad. Lavish donations and contributions given to fund the scientific pursuits of Muslim intellectuals from Baghdad and throughout an Islamic empire stretching from Asia to southern Europe helped to advance an already flourishing economic and commercial trading imperium. So I mention that because although the impact and global implications of the research and development occurring inside Saudi Arabia is certainly not as globally widespread as the economic benefits the Islamic world derived from the Abyssinian innovations 14 centuries ago. Nevertheless, in Chapter 2, I discuss the Saudi pursuit of innovation and invention. I especially note when it comes to actualizing the development of technological advancement within the kingdom, much of the discourse in Saudi Arabia has centered on innovation as opposed to the concept of invention. Chapter 2 devotes considerable time to discussing the importance between the difference between innovation and invention. I note that most technology historians and experts agree that invention is not the same as innovation, and to put it simply, invention is always in the first instance, and what follows in terms of improvement to the original thing is in some form or another innovation. So the tip of the spear organizations leading Saudi Arabia forward in both innovation and invention, such as King Abdullah University for Science and Technology, or KAUST as it's called, King Abdulaziz City for Science and Technology, or KAXT as it's known, the National Patent Office, and others are discussed in Chapter 2 and their importance to bringing new technologies and inventions forward. Chapter 3 actually is perhaps my favorite chapter in the book because it discusses in detail these Saudi family-owned businesses. The chapter discusses the enduring legacy of these businesses and gives the reader a rare look at several of the country's most respected family establishments. The research of this chapter entailed hours of interviews with founders and first generation, second generation, third generation family members, as well as covering published and unpublished literature on how these businesses have historically operated in the country, in the peninsula, and globally. Saudi family-owned businesses are very much defined, of course, by the cultural norms and historical standards of how businesses operate in the country. By nature of the cultural mores of Saudi society, the internal operations and management of these companies have been closed to outsiders. However, since the late 1960s, Saudi family-owned businesses have taken on foreign joint venture partners and formed separate businesses as well as holding companies to manage their disparate businesses in the kingdom and worldwide. The composition of the boards of these family-owned businesses, therefore, have changed and evolved as boards which were once dominated only by family members, founders, first-generation family members, to one in which you have senior executives from largely Western companies, some Asian companies, sitting on these boards, and as well as second and third generation family members who have taken their place at the board table. So I discuss this in the book and the evolving nature of doing business with Saudi-owned businesses, particularly from the perspective of American companies. I had the pleasure of convincing the law firm Crowe Moring to have a section in the book which discusses some of the legal aspects that American companies should be aware of when they get into business with these Saudi-owned businesses. Chapter 3 discusses what happens when one or more of these original founders of a decades-old family-owned business dies or wishes to leave the business. Often these original founders were the guiding and authoritarian forces behind the company's growth and success over many decades. So I'm particularly pleased that I was able to get the opinions of the younger generation of family-owned business leaders on how they view the transition from the company's original leadership, often they're led by their fathers or uncles, to the second and third generation of Saudis eager to take their place in managing the businesses. I have to tell you the most fun I had in writing this book and researching the book is within chapter 4. Since my book examines the subject of entrepreneurship in Saudi Arabia and how the country promotes and supports its entrepreneurial ecosystem, I spent some time in researching the organizations and institutions in Saudi Arabia that are dedicated to supporting the entrepreneurial ecosystem. Moreover, I've looked at the hundreds of millions of dollars that Saudi Arabia spends every year to support small and medium-sized enterprises and the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So in Chapter 4, I look at the question as to whether Saudi Arabia has thrown money at the question of Saudi SMEs, and I look at the efficacy of the many government-funded agencies that have been created to support small and medium-sized businesses and entrepreneurship in the country. So most startups in Saudi Arabia are started by Saudi youth. And it's important to note that with 70% of the Saudi population being below the age of 25, the government is highly incentivized to support this ecosystem because many Saudis of the younger generation are looking at business as a way to further their life's pursuits, as opposed to historically, which has been the stability of government jobs. A big part of the relevancy of that question is what is the definition of the entrepreneur? And that was one of the primary purposes in looking at this subject, because if you're just throwing money at a problem without knowing what is an entrepreneur or who you should be helping, who call themselves entrepreneurs for the betterment, overall betterment of the economy, then you may be missing the mark. So in Chapter 4, I give the reader a sweeping historical view of the term of entrepreneur. From some of the earliest uses of the term and attempted definitions, such as those of celebrated 18th and 19th century economists and authors Richard Cotillon and J.B. Say, I think you will find it a very entertaining jaunt that includes the financial bankruptcy of France under Louis XIV, the Sun King, America's Louisiana Purchase, and on through today's view of what it means to take risks as an entrepreneur and reap profits from the pursuit. I'll briefly mention Chapter 5, although it is probably the most important chapter when it comes to today's Saudi business people. In this chapter, I interview 3 of Saudi Arabia's most insightful and thoughtful entrepreneurs. I explore the theme visited throughout my book, which is a central theme, and that is the issue of the fear of failure. The consequences to Saudi entrepreneurs who start a business and subsequently fail are not normally what they are for startups and entrepreneurs in the Western world. When you start a business in Saudi Arabia, and I would say primarily in the Arab world, the specter of failure can haunt you for a lifetime. It is not, as it is viewed in the Western culture, particularly in Silicon Valley, failure viewed as a badge of honor, which is to be worn and can catapult you to further startups and other activities. In Saudi Arabia, although it is changing, and in my interviews I did unearth that, and in many instances, the cultural and societal concept of failure, particularly for entrepreneurs, is changing and slowly becoming more acceptable. But today it can be a real stigma, and when you have bank loans or you go to lending institutions for a startup and you fail, you most certainly will be blacklisted going into the future in terms of seeking further capital to start your business. So we're quite proud in the Business Council. For a number of years we have worked with young entrepreneurs, as you see depicted here. We've worked with the King Salman Youth Center for a number of years, bringing groups of young Saudi entrepreneurs to the United States, to different cities, so that they get exposure to the various corporate communities here. In fact, I think we even took them to the New York Stock Exchange, where they rang the bell, which was pretty neat for them. So lastly, to move to the close of my remarks, I would like to talk about Chapter 6, which is basically a bringing together of the many themes that I have in the book in terms of the kingdom's current plans to transform the Saudi economy from one predominantly dependent on oil revenues to a more diversified one, which provides employment to all Saudis seeking it, and a more rejuvenated, entertained, and more healthy Saudi society. In April of last year, Saudi King Salman bin Abdulaziz proposed a comprehensive plan for the kingdom's economic and social growth and change. The plan is known as Vision 2030, and it is the most ambitious and detailed economic development project the Saudi government has ever undertaken. And if you read my book, almost from the first chapter, I talk about throughout the book the economic development plans over the decades that have transformed the economy of Saudi Arabia. This is the latest and greatest, and it was begun last year, and financial analysts, country study experts are all intently looking at Saudi Arabia to see how their progress will go. And it should be noted that other countries in the Gulf, Oman and a couple of others, have already done their version of Vision 2030. But Saudi Arabia, being the largest economy in the Gulf, is being intently scrutinized as to where it will go. So this plan, if ultimately successful, will have long-term and profound implications for a number of the country's critically important industry sectors. The vision also calls for reformation of how the country lives, stays healthy, and enjoys itself in recreation. Among the goals of 2030, and I'll just mention just a few of them here, By this plan, if successful, they will increase the average life expectancy of Saudis from 74 years to 80 years. If successful, they hope to lower the rate of unemployment from currently 11.6 to 7%, and significantly lower the rate of Saudi women unemployed, which is actually double the national average. They also want to increase small and medium-sized enterprise contribution to the GDP from currently 20% to 35%. Again, with going back to women, to increase women's participation in the workforce from 22% to 30%. They want to move the current position of Saudi Arabia from the 19th largest economy to the 12th. And that is a heavy lift, but considering they are the only Arab country in the G20, may not be a heavy lift. If successful, they want to increase foreign direct investment from 3.8% to the international level or standard of 5.7% of GDP. And a couple of more to increase the private sector's contribution from 40% to 65% of GDP, and to raise the share of non-oil exports in the non-oil GDP from 16% to 50%. Those last two, and I talk about this throughout the book, I believe that in order for the kingdom to be successful in Vision 2030, it is absolutely crucial that they get buy-in from the country's private sector. And these companies, many of them family-owned businesses, are global corporations that have assets all around the world. To bring that capital spending from other markets back into Saudi Arabia, to take off a lot of the capital spending that are currently on the government's books, is what the kingdom wants to do. So those foreign investors already in the kingdom, particularly American investors, are solidly behind the country's efforts to transform the country. In the last chapter of my book, I recount a meeting that was held on the sidelines of King Salman's visit to Washington in September 2015. I had the privilege of sort of being a gadfly in the room. You had, and I named some of these Fortune 500 chairmen and CEOs that were around the table in the book. Having worked in the business world for a while and seen people, I'm not easily impressed. But the group that was there with three of these Saudi ministers was pretty heady. And I talk about that in the book. You'll have to read the book to find out what they said. But I can tell you that these American businesses were solidly behind Vision 2030. They had some concerns and expressed some opinions as to some of the difficulties they encounter in Saudi Arabia. But by and large, they are all in, of course, having in some instances hundreds of millions and billions of dollars already invested in Saudi Arabia with the kingdom and its companies. They want to see them succeed. So I think with that, I will just briefly mention my current employer, the U.S. Saudi Arabian Business Council. It's hard to believe I've been there for 10 years already. But of course, we are a membership organization. We are quite privileged. If you look at our board of directors, I mean, you'll see some stellar individuals such as the CEO of Saudi Aramco, many of the captains of industry in Saudi Arabia, as well as the equal number of Fortune 500 company chairmen and CEOs and senior executives that are on our board. And moreover, if you look at our membership, what I tried to do when I joined the Business Council 10 years ago was to grow our roster of medium and small enterprises because it was predominantly it was dominated by the large companies. And we've been very successful in bringing in more small and medium-sized companies with niche technologies and services that are finding market receptivity in Saudi Arabia. So we're pleased with that. You'll see here on the slide the range of our services, from customized business advisory services to printed and digital material that talks about what's going on economically in the country, to market sector reports. and even visa services. You still need a Saudi visa to go to Saudi Arabia. So with that, again, let me thank the Library of Congress for the opportunity to highlight my book, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you. Anything? Yes?
Actually, I have a question about the collection, the amazing collection of pictures that you use in your book, especially the pictures of the 20s and 30s. What is the source of these pictures?
So a story on that, in 2013, as some of you may know, the kingdom is trying to build automobiles, and that's one of their aspirations because of the downstream petrochemical industry in Saudi Arabia. A lot of the car parts that are made have some type of input materials, from plastics to some metals, but mostly downstream petrochemical materials. So what we did with the kingdom was we organized an automobile conference just outside of Detroit. And we had about a couple hundred people there, but we had to do some research to have some of the presentations that were given. So automobiles, we did some research on automobiles. I will, now that I have your card, I will go back to our folks and find out where those photographs came from. A couple of them came actually from some of the auto manufacturers. So the big four, or the big three now, were there. They're senior executives from Ford and GM and others. And we requested some photographs from them. So some of them actually came from I think GM, the one with the Buick. But I'll find out for you. Okay. Yes. Joan, yes.
I was fascinated. You gave a little kind of glimpse at women and entrepreneurship. Can you expand on that a little bit? Are the women-owned or these family-owned businesses headed up by women? And also, what is the status of women in the younger sector as far as entrepreneurship? Are they beginning to start up small businesses? And how does that relate to some of the U.S. small businesses that we focus and try to promote minority, women-owned businesses as well?
So women are dynamic and prolific business owners in Saudi Arabia. What you used to hear, which is quite true in Saudi Arabia, is that, while the gentlemen have these positions in government and other positions, they have these businesses that they run, and the women that take care of those businesses are their wives or daughters, and so years back, decades back, women started honing their business skills a long time ago. It's been within the last, I'd say, 15 years that, maybe 20, but probably 15, that an amazing amount of startups in Saudi Arabia are women-owned businesses. It's really a truly interesting story, because in some of the interviews that I've had, you'll speak with women. Of course, as you know, Saudi Arabia is a gender segregated society, and so women are still not adequately represented in many of the upper echelons of Saudi administrative offices, government offices. So these women, they have had difficult waters to navigate in order to set up businesses. And they are truly intrepid in their spirit, because they get it done. I've heard of stories where, not taking no for an answer was a bit dramatic, but these women, they get it done, they get their businesses formulated or created, and they go forward. The debate in the kingdom in terms of the entrepreneurial ecosystem and women have to do with who you should be helping. So these women-owned businesses range from very creative clothing and accessories, the colorful abayas, the jewelry, cupcake industries. I went to an incubator a couple of months ago in the Eastern Province, and it was just mind-spinning because it was an incubator solely for women. And it was a building of 2 floors. Many businesses were started. You had a lady there that started her own oud company, which is the perfume prevalent in the Middle East, cologne, if you're a guy. Very expensive. I mean, these are very expensive. This lady makes them for royalty, and they go from, a few $100s to a couple $1,000s for a small bottle. Cupcake manufacturers. I had to run out of there because one was a chocolatier, and I kept eating these things, and I got to get out of here. But these women, they're just amazing. So the question in Saudi Arabia now is, do we help these women, or do we try to get the women that are in family-owned businesses already, have spun out and have their operations that are much larger in economic consequence to the kingdom. So that's going on. But they are truly amazing. Yeah, I hope I answered your question. Yeah.
Question with respect to the patent activity. And a few years ago, I saw numbers of the companies which was patent filed. Did you, I guess, maybe take a look at that, get a sense of how the younger generation views not just patent, but maybe property overall and its protection vis-a-vis maybe older generation?
So you need to buy my book. Yes, I spent a good deal of time talking about technology patenting, and I interviewed Mr. Sotis, who runs the National Patent Office, spent a number of hours with him and some of his colleagues, and I talk about the evolution of the patent process in Saudi Arabia, and it is improving. I mean, it used to take an incredible amount of time, 1.5 years, 2 years to patent something, and longer. Now they have it down to months, and they're passionate about bringing efficiency to the process. A lot of the patents are coming from young Saudis, many of them matriculating through the universities, through the incubators, but they are, the process is discussed very extensively in my book, yeah. It's the same. Normally you'll find universities that have incubators where they take in applications from Saudis, many of them students, but they don't have to be. They make these applications to have access to physical facilities where they make available to these young entrepreneurs the hardware, the equipment, in many instances, a lot of the soft research and resources that are available within the institutions to help them bring to market, commercialize their patents, their ideas. And so many of the companies, including one very famous lady that made an Arabic coffee maker that is selling, a Saudi lady that made an Arabic coffee, instant coffee maker, is selling, what is her name? Do you know? Yeah, it's in the book. She's famous. But those are examples of technologies and commercialized businesses, business products that came out of incubators. The same concept in the West.
One more last question.
Yes.
Do American women start to go and open business in Saudi Arabia, and do they allow them? How does it work?
Yeah, so that's one of the misconceptions. Maybe deserved 15, 20 years ago, but not so much now. So the perception is that women, American women, Western women going to Saudi Arabia can't get in the country, they can't get visas, they can't do business. There are certain visa requirements, for instance, for married women, you have to, certain information. No, they don't have to be married. But, on the visa application, you have to basically document that you're married and who, but when I was commercial attaché, for instance, from '03 to '06, I had heard that, and yet for almost the entire 3 years that I was there, almost every month or every other month, we'd see these executives, female executives from American companies coming in, landing, doing their 2-3 days worth of business, going out and having no difficulty whatsoever. And that's only improved over the years. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Now,
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.